The handkerchief was in his breast pocket when the lobby filled with people he had never seen before. Benjamin Sullivan stood at the concierge desk that Tuesday morning, the way he had stood there for 3 years, both hands resting lightly on the polished counter, the brass lamp at his left elbow throwing its usual amber circle across the reservation ledger. He had arrived at 6:40, same as always. He had straightened the brochure rack by the window, same as always. He had set out the small dish of wrapped mints that no one much took anymore, but that felt like a courtesy worth extending regardless, same as always. The handkerchief was folded into a neat square and tucked just so, a small white corner visible at his breast pocket, and he did not know yet what had been done to it while it was away from him. He did not know what that white square was about to mean. He found out when she walked through the front door behind the acquisition team. But that morning had not yet arrived when Benjamin first noticed the woman in the service corridor. On a Wednesday 3 weeks earlier, the second full day of what the general manager had described in a brief staff meeting as a facilities assessment. 9 days, Mr. Gould had said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. They are evaluating the property for potential improvements. Everyone will continue their regular duties. Benjamin had written nothing down because there was nothing to write. He continued his regular duties. The Ashgrove Hotel occupied a 6-story building on Clement Street, the kind of address that had once been respectable and was now simply familiar. The lobby retained its original terrazzo floor and a chandelier that someone had made the sensible decision not to update, and the front desk staff wore navy blazers with a small silver pin at the lapel. Benjamin had worn his blazer for 3 years. In that time he had learned the preferences of the hotel's regular guests, the names of their dogs when dogs were permitted, the particular way the elevator on the 4th floor stuck briefly between 2 and 3 if it had been raining. He had learned also the particular way Constance Farrow communicated her assessments of his performance without quite stating them as assessments. Constance managed the front desk with the focused attention of someone who understood that her authority existed precisely at the intersection of presentation and hierarchy. She was 46, precise in her dress, and had been at the Ashgrove for 11 years. She did not dislike Benjamin. Dislike would have required her to take him more seriously than she did. What she felt for him was something closer to a sustained doubt about his suitability, a doubt she expressed in small economies of language, the way she said his name with a slight upward inflection, as though his presence in the role was still a question pending resolution, the way she repeated an instruction he had already acted on, the way she stepped between him and a guest if the conversation looked like it was proceeding without difficulty. On the first Monday of that month, a guest named Mr. Fallon had complained about a noise from the room adjacent to his, a persistent knocking that had started at 7 in the morning and had not resolved by 9. The room had been unoccupied. The noise had been a loose bracket on the radiator pipe, a maintenance issue logged and forwarded to the contracted repairs team 3 days before Mr. Fallon's arrival. The repairs team had not yet addressed it. Benjamin had noted this in the maintenance log, had called up twice, had been told the schedule was full, and the item would be handled that afternoon. It was handled at 4, which was too late for Mr. Fallon, who had spent his morning irritated and had said so at the front desk. Constance was there when Mr. Fallon arrived to express this. She listened. She apologized with exactly the right number of words. Then she turned to Benjamin in a way that took in the small audience of 2 other front desk staff and a departing housekeeper. When a logged maintenance issue carries a guest impact, I expect it escalated before it becomes a complaint, she said. Benjamin said he had called up twice and noted the priority. Constance said that the result of the process mattered more than the execution of the steps, and that she trusted he understood the distinction. He said that he did. She held his gaze for a moment that was precisely long enough to establish who had the final word, then attended to something on her screen. Benjamin turned back to his station. The departing housekeeper paused at the corridor entrance. She was a small woman in her early 50s named Harriet Doyle, who had been at the Ash Grove longer than anyone except the general manager, and who had a habit of noticing things that the rest of the floor either missed or chose not to notice. She looked at Benjamin with an expression that was not sympathy exactly, but was at least acknowledgement, then carried on down the hall. That was a Monday. The facilities consultant arrived on Wednesday. Benjamin was in the service corridor on the second floor retrieving a folding luggage rack that housekeeping had reported as having a stuck wheel when he heard footsteps on the concrete stairs behind him, measured and unhurried. He turned and found a woman coming down from the third floor, carrying a clipboard and a small flashlight. She wore a plain grey jacket over dark trousers, practical shoes with some scuff at the toe, hair pulled back simply. She looked at the clipboard, then at the wall junction where the radiator pipe ran down toward the basement, then made a note. Benjamin said good morning. She looked up without particular surprise. She said good morning. He asked if she needed anything from the storage area since he was just coming from there. She said she was fine, thank you. He moved past her with the luggage rack and continued to the elevator. Nothing about the exchange was unusual. A facilities consultant in a service corridor was precisely where a facilities consultant should be, and Benjamin had extended the same offer of assistance he would have extended to anyone. He thought about it for perhaps 30 seconds afterward, which was the time it took to load the rack into the elevator, and then he thought about something else. He saw her again on Thursday in the lobby, standing near the window seat with the clipboard resting in the crook of her arm, watching the way the morning light came through the east-facing glass and hit the terrazzo floor. She was not writing anything down. She was simply watching. Benjamin was at the concierge desk and did not approach because she did not appear to need anything. At a certain point, she looked over at him, and he nodded in a way that meant he was there if needed. She looked back at the floor. On Friday, she came to the desk with a question about the maintenance log protocol, specifically who received the escalated copies and how long an open item typically remained unresolved before a second escalation. Benjamin told her how the system worked, specifically and without editorializing. She wrote 2 things down. She said thank you in the same even tone she had used in the corridor, as though she were keeping careful track of something, and his answer had fit into that tracking. He said of course, and meant it. Constance was not at the desk during this exchange. She had been in Mr. Gould's office for most of the morning. When she came back out, she passed through the lobby without stopping and went directly to the service corridor, and something about the set of her shoulders suggested the meeting had not been easy. That evening, after the desk rotation ended at 6, Benjamin found himself in the small staff coat room where the blazers were hung for pressing, and the extra supply of silver pins was kept in a tin on the top shelf. He was retrieving his personal jacket when he noticed something on the narrow bench against the wall. It was a handkerchief, plain white cotton, not folded, but lying slightly open as though it had slipped from a pocket. There was no name on it, no marking. A small monogram space in the corner was unworked, just the fabric. He picked it up. He stood with it for a moment, then took it to the small utility sink in the corner of the room and held it under cold water, because the practical thing was to address it before the cotton set. He rinsed it, pressed it between 2 clean cloth squares from the supply shelf, and carried it home in a sealed bag, the way he would have carried any item requiring proper laundering. He washed it at home that night with the careful attention he gave to anything that wasn't his to damage. He pressed it the next morning, rolled the edges flat, and folded it into a precise square. On Saturday, he brought it back and left it at the small holding shelf near the concierge desk, where found items were logged, before going to the lost and found. He wrote a small card. Found Friday, coat room, returned pressed. He did not sign it because the card was not about him. The consultant picked it up on Saturday afternoon. She came to the desk not to speak about maintenance logs this time and asked if someone had left the handkerchief for her. Benjamin said yes, he had found it. She looked at the folded square for a moment. She said it was very neatly done. He said it had been a simple thing. She put it in her jacket pocket without further comment. Benjamin turned back to the reservation screen. He thought that was the end of it. On Tuesday of the following week, the guest complaint about the lobby's flower arrangement came down from the third-floor suite. The guest was a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Eddington, who stayed at the Ashgrove twice a year and had opinions that she communicated with the precision of someone accustomed to having them received. The arrangement in the lobby alcove had been changed by housekeeping from the usual white freesia to something involving orange lilies, because the wholesaler had run short, and Mrs. Eddington found the orange unsettling and had said so to 3 different members of staff before Constance was brought into the loop. Constance stood in the lobby with Mrs. Eddington and listened carefully, and said she entirely agreed about the importance of the regular aesthetic, and then she turned to Benjamin, who had the misfortune of being the visible front desk presence at that moment, and said that she would expect him to have flagged the substitution before the arrangement was placed. Benjamin said the floral order came through housekeeping directly, not through the concierge desk. Constance said that a 3-year member of the concierge team should by now understand that the guest experience did not operate in departmental silos. Mrs. Eddington looked between them with the attentive interest of someone watching a familiar kind of theatre. Benjamin said he understood. He turned to Mrs. Eddington and said that the freesia would be back in the alcove by 4 o'clock, and that if she preferred, he could arrange for a small arrangement to be placed in her suite directly in the meantime. Mrs. Eddington said that was very thoughtful. She went to the elevator. Constance waited until the elevator doors had closed before she said, quietly and with complete composure, that he might want to consider whether the concierge role was the best use of his particular strengths. Benjamin kept his eyes on the desk. He said he appreciated the feedback. He was aware, without turning around, that someone was in the seating area behind him. The consultant had been working at one of the corner tables since mid-morning, reviewing what appeared to be building diagrams. He did not know if she had heard. He did not look to check. Harriet appeared from the housekeeping corridor 10 minutes later with the freesia arrangement, as though she had anticipated the need, which she probably had. She set it in the alcove without being asked. She caught Benjamin's eye on her way back, the same look she'd given him after the radiator complaint, and this time it held just a fraction longer. The building diagrams on the corner table were still there at 3 in the afternoon. The consultant herself had gone somewhere, perhaps up to the service floors, perhaps out. The diagrams were weighted at one corner with a small, smooth stone she seemed to carry in her jacket pocket, and Benjamin noticed this because he had seen her set it down on 2 other surfaces during her 9 days of walking the property. On the windowsill on the 2nd floor when she was making notes about the pipe junction, on the front desk counter once when she set down her clipboard to check her phone. It was a river stone, grey-green, unremarkable. He noticed it the way you notice anything a person carries that is not quite required, and therefore reveals something about the carrying. On Thursday of her 2nd week, he brought her a cup of coffee without being asked. She had been in the same corner from 9 to 11 and had not moved for a glass of water or anything else. The hotel provided a coffee service near the front desk for guests, and the coffee was decent, and it seemed like a plain thing to do. He brought it across the lobby on a small tray with a paper sleeve to protect her hand, set it at the edge of the table so as not to disturb the diagrams, and said that he had not added anything because he did not know her preference. She looked at the cup, then at him. She said she took it plain. He said that was convenient then. Something happened in the vicinity of her expression. Not quite a smile, but the possibility of one, held briefly and then released. She wrapped her hands around the cup. She said thank you in that same careful tone she used for everything, the one that gave away nothing about rank or mood or anything else, that simply acknowledged the exchange for exactly what it was. He went back to the desk. On Friday morning, the maintenance log on the second-floor pipe junction was finally marked resolved. Benjamin noted this and updated the relevant guest complaint record. Constance reviewed the record at noon, found no irregularities and said nothing to Benjamin about any of it, which was its own kind of communication. The consultant was on the 5th floor that morning. He knew because Harriet told him, with the careful obliqueness she used when passing along information she thought might matter, without quite saying why she thought it might matter. She said the consultant had been up there since 7, that she'd asked Harriet for a copy of the housekeeping schedule going back 3 months, and that she'd spent 40 minutes in the linen room counting something. Benjamin said, counting what? Harriet said she wasn't sure. Sets of something. She had a small notebook. Benjamin returned to the reservation screen. He thought about the Riverstone. He thought about the coffee, how she had wrapped both hands around the cup. He thought about the maintenance log questions, the building diagrams, the particular way she walked the corridors as though she were reading the walls. None of these things cohered into anything he could name. The gap between what he could see and what he suspected was wide enough to be uncomfortable, and he was practiced enough in his own restraint to leave it wide rather than bridge it with an assumption. The next day was Saturday, the 8th day of her 9-day assessment, and Constance called a brief staff check-in at noon in the back office. Benjamin was there along with the 2 other front desk staff, a woman named Dana and a young man recently hired named Paul, who was still learning the brochure rack. Constance reviewed the upcoming week's occupancy, discussed the Tuesday delivery schedule, and mentioned, with the particular precision she used when she wanted something heard without appearing to direct it, that Mr. Gould expected all public-facing staff to be at their best next week, as the ownership review was concluding. No one asked what the ownership review involved. Constance's eyes moved across the room and landed briefly on Benjamin in a way that might have been coincidence and might not have been. He went home that evening along the same route he always took, down 2 blocks of Clement, and then left toward the park, and he did not think too carefully about the staff meeting, because there was nothing in it yet that required thinking about carefully. What happened next required him to think about it very carefully. Sunday was his day off. He came in on Monday morning at 6:40 and began the regular routine. Brochure rack, lamp, dish of mints, reservation ledger open on the screen. At 7:15 he went to the east stairwell to collect a maintenance request form that the overnight staff had left clipped to the fire door handle, a habit they'd developed to make sure items didn't sit in the log without a physical flag. The stairwell at 7:15 was quiet, the fluorescent light above the second landing still on its 10-minute morning warm-up cycle. He was on the first landing, reaching for the clip, when he heard voices from the floor above. He was not eavesdropping. He was not listening. The building carried sound in that stairwell in a particular way he had never thought to mention to anyone. A quality of the concrete and the metal banister, and the way the doors on each floor were flush rather than recessed. And what came down to him from the second landing was perfectly clear without being intended for him. Constance's voice. And Mr. Gould's, answering. Constance said that she wanted to flag a personnel concern before the review concluded, because she thought it would be better to address it in advance than to have a staffing inconsistency complicate the picture. She said that Benjamin Sullivan had been with the desk team for 3 years, which was long enough to make a fair assessment, and that her fair assessment was that he lacked the front-facing instincts the hotel needed at its best. She said the Fallon complaint, the Mrs. Eddington situation, the general quality of his guest interactions. She said she didn't doubt he was diligent, but diligence without presentation was just process, and the Ashgrove's face was its people. Mr. Gould said something low that Benjamin didn't fully catch. Constance said she thought a transition before the new management structure was in place would be cleaner than a transition after, when any change might look reactive rather than proactive. There was a pause, then footsteps on the second landing, moving away from the stairwell toward the floor. Benjamin stood with the maintenance form in his hand. The fluorescent light finished its warm-up cycle and reached its full brightness. He read the form without seeing it, or rather he saw it, but the information slid past him, because the part of his mind that processed information was occupied with something else entirely. He understood what he had just heard. He understood it clearly without the possibility of alternative interpretation. Constance had not been venting frustration. She had been making a case. There was a specific word she had used, transition, before the new management structure, which meant she was presenting this to Mr. Gould not as an ongoing concern, but as a recommended action with a suggested timeline. And the timeline was now, before whatever was about to change at the Ashgrove changed. He folded the maintenance form. He put it in his jacket pocket. He walked back down to the lobby. He stood at the concierge desk and set his hands on the counter. Both hands, the way he always did. Dana was at the opposite end of the desk checking the day's arrivals. Paul was straightening the blazers on the rack near the elevator. The lobby was quiet at 7:22 in the morning, the chandelier still on its night setting, the terrazzo floor holding the cool grey light that came through the east window before the sun had fully cleared the building opposite. He thought about leaving. He thought about it with the directness he gave to most problems, which meant he considered it honestly, and without performing resilience, he didn't feel. 3 years. The Fallon complaint. The Mrs. Eddington situation. Diligence without presentation. He had heard the words and they had landed, and he was not going to pretend they hadn't landed. He straightened the small dish of mince. He turned on the brass lamp. He opened the reservation ledger to Tuesday's arrivals. He stayed. Not because he had decided Constance was wrong, not because he had a plan, not because anything had shifted in his understanding of his position at the Ashgrove. He stayed because leaving in response to a conversation he was not supposed to have heard would have been a kind of performance, and he was not interested in performing anything, including indignation. He was good at his work. He knew this without requiring it to be confirmed. He would continue to be good at it, and whatever came of the ownership review would come. He was at the desk at 8:15 when the consultant came through the lobby with her clipboard for what he did not yet know was the last time. She was moving with the same unhurried exactness she always moved with. But something in her circuit was different that morning. She stopped at the alcove where the freesia arrangement was still holding, and looked at it for a moment, the small, smooth stone visible in her jacket pocket where the top edge caught the light. She crossed to the front desk, not to Benjamin's end where he was standing, to the far end where Dana was reviewing arrivals. She asked Dana something in a low voice. Dana looked up and pointed toward Benjamin, and the consultant turned. She came to his end of the desk. She said she had a request. He said of course. She said she was checking out this afternoon, and she wanted to leave something at the desk for a member of staff, if that was possible. He said it was. She said she would bring it down at 3. He wrote it in the log, because it was the kind of thing he logged. She went back through the lobby with her clipboard, and he watched her go through the glass door to the street, and he did not know where she was going or when she would be back, or quite what to make of the quiet, particular way she had delivered that request. At 2:50 in the afternoon, he was still at the desk when she came in from the street. She was not carrying the clipboard. She was carrying a small white envelope, which she placed on the front desk counter in front of him and said was for him. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. She said she was checking out. She said the hotel had been very well looked after. He said he was glad to hear it. She picked up her bag from where it rested against the desk. She said thank you for the coffee. He said it had been a plain thing. She said that was what had made it worth noting. Then she walked to the elevator and the doors closed and she was gone. He held the envelope for a moment, then set it under the desk, because Constance was passing through the lobby at that exact moment. And something about opening a personal item with Constance within eyeline felt like a kind of exposure he was not ready for. He finished the afternoon. He locked the reservation ledger at 6. He put on his jacket. He took the envelope out from under the desk and put it in his pocket and went home. He opened it at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside him. Inside was the handkerchief. His handkerchief, except it had not been his when he laundered it and pressed it and returned it, because it had had no initials in the corner, no marking, nothing. Now the corner held a small, neat monogram. 3 letters, worked in dark thread, careful and even. BSM. He did not know what the M was for because his middle name was Martin, and he had never told her that. And there was no way she could have known it from the front desk log or the maintenance system or any of the surfaces he had moved across in her presence. He set the handkerchief on the table. He looked at the 3 letters for a long time. He understood something, but only the outer edge of it, the way you understand the shape of a room from what the light shows you, and not yet from walking all the way through it. The next morning was Tuesday. He arrived at 6:40, same as always. He ironed the blazer the way he always did, sleeves first, then the back, then the front with the lapels pressed flat. He put the handkerchief in his breast pocket, the embroidered corner folded inward, and took the bus to Clement Street. The lobby was quiet until 9:15 when a car pulled up at the hotel entrance that was not a cab or a car service, but a large, clean sedan with a second one behind it. The people who came through the door after that were wearing better suits than people who came to the Ashgrove typically wore. There were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman, carrying folder cases and the specific kind of unhurried urgency that belonged to people arriving at a meeting they had already arranged. The general manager came out of his office and met them at the threshold. Benjamin watched this the way he watched everything, which was with full attention and the discipline not to show it. Then the revolving door turned again, and she came in behind them. She was not wearing the grey jacket, she was not carrying the clipboard. She wore a dark coat, buttoned, and her hair was down, and she walked through the lobby door with the same unhurried exactness as always, except that the general manager, who had been greeting the suits, turned when he saw her, and his expression shifted in a way Benjamin had never seen it shift, a small, involuntary recalibration of the whole face. He said her name. He said, "Ms. Marsh, welcome back." And then he said, "Thank you for making time to be here for the announcement." The 4 people with the folder cases had turned when they heard the name. 2 of them straightened slightly. One of the men moved to hold the space around her without being asked, the kind of practiced positioning that meant something about relative standing. Benjamin did not need explained. Constance came out of the back office at that moment, drawn by the sound of arrivals, the way she always came when there was something significant happening in the lobby she had not been briefed on. She came through the door with her hands clasped at her waist, and her expression composed into the attentive welcome she used for important guests. And she looked at the group assembled in the lobby, and she looked at the woman they were arranged around, and something behind her eyes moved like something finding its level. Mr. Gould said, for the room, that he was pleased to announce the completion of the acquisition process, and that the Ashgrove would be joining the Sullivan Group's regional portfolio, effective at the end of the month. He said that Ms. Lena Marsh, as the group's principal and lead on the regional expansion, had been personally overseeing the assessment. He said the assessment had been very favourable. He said there would be a full staff briefing at 11. Constance's hands, still clasped at her waist, tightened. Benjamin could see this from where he stood without having to watch her directly. He was watching Lena Marsh because she was the only place in the room that made sense to watch. She was standing near the window, the same window where he had seen her on that first Thursday watching the light on the terrazzo floor. And the morning light was coming through it, now exactly as it had then, falling across the same floor in the same amber angle. She was looking at the general manager and answering a question about the handoff schedule in the same measured voice she had used to tell him she took her coffee plain. She looked across the room at him. He was standing at the concierge desk, both hands on the counter, the brass lamp on at his left elbow, the dish of wrapped mince, the reservation ledger open on the screen. He did not move. He did not nod. He stood the way he always stood, with the particular evenness that Constance had spent 3 years describing as a failure of presentation. The corner of Lena's mouth moved slightly in a direction that was not quite professional and not quite nothing. Then someone addressed her, and she turned. Harriet appeared at the housekeeping corridor entrance, as though she'd calculated the exact moment to arrive. She stood there in her grey work coat with her arms at her sides, and she looked at Benjamin with an expression that was the fullest version of all the other looks she had given him over 3 years. The one after the Fallon complaint, the one after the Mrs. Eddington situation, the one after Constance's stairwell summation of his unsuitability. This look contained all of those and added something new to them, something warm and perfectly quiet. And it said, without requiring words, that she had known something he hadn't and had held it carefully until the right moment. Constance said at some point in the minutes that followed that she wanted to speak with Mr. Gould about the transition timeline. Her voice had the shape of someone making a request and the weight of someone who had already heard the answer. Mr. Gould said he was sure there would be time for that after the 11 o'clock briefing, and moved toward the conference room with the folder cases following behind him. Constance stood near the front desk for a moment, then turned towards the back office. She passed within arm's length of Benjamin's station, and she did not offer the usual upward inflection of his name, did not offer anything, actually. She went through the door without a word. The lobby held the morning quiet that followed a room rearranging itself. Benjamin reached up and adjusted the handkerchief in his breast pocket, not out of self-consciousness but out of the small physical habit of settling himself. The same gesture he made with his cuffs when he arrived each morning. The embroidered corner was still folded inward. He could feel the neat ridges of the thread through the cotton, 3 letters worked with precision and care, and the M in the middle that she had known without being told. Harriet crossed the lobby floor and stopped at his end of the desk. She set her hands on the counter beside his and looked at the terrazzo floor for a moment. She said, quietly, that she thought he ought to know she had mentioned his full name to the consultant on her 3rd day. She said the consultant had asked about the staff who maintained the hotel's standards most consistently, and Harriet had told her, Benjamin Sullivan Martin, concierge desk, 3 years, never once let a logged item slide. Benjamin looked at the floor too. He said he supposed that explained the M. Harriet said she supposed it did. She went back to the housekeeping corridor. The lobby was briefly, purely still. At 11 o'clock, the full staff gathered in the conference room and Mr. Gould presented the acquisition formally, with charts that Benjamin did not look at closely because he was looking at Lena, who was standing at the side of the room with her hands clasped behind her back, and her eyes moving across the assembled faces of the people who worked in the building she had been examining for 9 days. Her gaze moved with the same quiet thoroughness as her clipboard, the same careful reading of surfaces and junctions. When it reached Benjamin's side of the room, it paused for just the span of a sentence spoken by someone else entirely, and then it moved on. After the briefing in the corridor outside the conference room, she stopped beside him. She said she hoped the disruption to normal operations had not been too significant during the assessment. He said it had been manageable. She said the hotel maintained its standards more consistently than most properties at this tier. He said he was glad to hear it. She said she had noticed. The specific weight of that last sentence was not declared or amplified. It landed simply, the way plain things do when they have been earned. He stood with it for a moment, this short particular sentence that contained everything she had seen in 9 days of walking corridors with a clipboard and a river stone and a cup of plain coffee and a handkerchief, returned to her pressed and folded, and he found that he could not improve on it by adding anything to it. So he didn't. He said, after a moment, that he was glad of that too. She looked at him directly, the way she had looked at the maintenance log questions, at the building diagrams, at the light on the terrazzo floor. She was not performing anything. Neither was he. She said there would be changes to the management structure over the coming month. She said she wanted staff transitions handled thoughtfully, and that she would personally be involved in the conversations about the desk team's direction. He understood what that meant and what it did not mean, and he was careful to receive it only as what it was, a fact about the near future, stated plainly by the person with the authority to determine it. He thanked her. She nodded once. She went back toward the conference room. The corridor was empty after that, and Benjamin stood in it for a moment. The way you stand in a place once you understand it differently, not because the walls have changed, but because the light has shifted and you are seeing what was there all along. He went back to the concierge desk. He straightened the brochure rack. He checked the reservation screen for afternoon arrivals. The chandelier above the lobby had switched over to its daytime setting, and the terrazzo floor held the full late morning light, warm and particular, the same floor it had always been. He reached into his breast pocket and unfolded the handkerchief, just enough to see the 3 letters in the corner, then folded it back precisely and settled it in place. The white square showed at his lapel clean and exact, the same as it had been every morning for 3 years. He set his hands on the counter and waited for the next guest to arrive.